Rain hammered against the storefront windows of Brew Haven, the small coffee shop tucked between glass towers in downtown Seattle. Natasha Morgan wiped down the espresso machine for the third time that evening, her movements automatic after 5 years of the same routine. The clock above the register showed 8:47 p.m., 13 minutes until closing. The door chime rang despite the storm. A man stumbled inside, drenched from head to toe. His expensive suit clung to his frame, and his dark hair dripped onto the checkered floor. Natasha looked up, ready to point at the closing time sign, but something in his expression stopped her. He looked terrified. "We're about to close," she said gently, though her hand remained on the towel. The man approached the counter, his breathing uneven. "I know this sounds insane, but I need your help." His voice carried an accent she couldn't quite place, somewhere between British refinement and American directness. Natasha raised an eyebrow. "If you need coffee, I can make you one to go." "I need a date." The words tumbled out quickly. "Just for tonight, please." She blinked, certain she had misheard over the thunder. "Excuse me?" He ran a hand through his wet hair, water droplets flying. "There are photographers outside the restaurant 3 blocks from here. They're waiting for me. I was supposed to arrive with someone, but she canceled last minute. If I show up alone, the headlines tomorrow will destroy a deal I've been working on for 2 years. Natasha crossed her arms. "And you think asking a random coffee shop worker to pretend to be your date is a good plan?" "I'm Julian Thornfield," he said, as if that explained everything. The name registered slowly. Julian Thornfield. The man whose face appeared on business magazines and tech blogs. The CEO who had built Thornfield Innovations from a garage startup to a billion-dollar empire before turning 35. The same man currently standing in her coffee shop looking like a lost puppy. "I know who you are," Natasha said carefully. "That doesn't explain why you're here." Julian glanced toward the window where camera flashes occasionally lit up the darkness. "Because everyone else I know would sell this story to the press by morning. But you?" He looked at her with something resembling hope. "You don't seem like someone who cares about that world." She should have said no. Every reasonable bone in her body screamed to refuse. But Natasha had spent her entire life being reasonable. And where had it gotten her? Managing a coffee shop that barely paid enough to cover her student loans while her dreams of opening her own bakery collected dust. "What's in it for me?" she asked. Relief flooded his features. "Name your price." "I don't want money." The words surprised even her. "But I want something." "Anything." Natasha took a breath. "My lease on this building is up in 3 months. The landlord wants to sell it to developers. If you can help me buy it, I'll be your date tonight." Julian didn't hesitate. "Done. My lawyer will have the paperwork ready by Monday." She studied his face, searching for deception, but found only desperate sincerity. "One night, that's all." "One night," he agreed. The performance begins. 20 minutes later, Natasha stood in front of her apartment mirror, pulling her dark hair from its usual ponytail. She had changed into the only dress she owned that didn't scream, "coffee shop manager on a budget." A simple navy wrap dress her sister had given her last Christmas. Julian waited in the living room, having borrowed a dry shirt from her neighbor's boyfriend. He looked almost normal without the soaked suit jacket, just a man with worry lines around his eyes and a smartphone that wouldn't stop buzzing. "Ready?" he asked when she emerged. "As I'll ever be." The restaurant Celestia occupied. The top floor of a building Natasha had walked past 1,000 times but never entered. The kind of place where reservations required a 3-month wait and connections she didn't have. Photographers swarmed the moment their car pulled up. Julian stepped out first, then extended his hand to her. The flashes were blinding. "Mr. Thornfield, who's your companion?" "Julian, is this serious?" "What about Victoria Ashford?" He ignored every question. his hand steady on Natasha's back as they walked through the chaos. She kept her chin up, channeling every ounce of confidence she didn't feel. Inside, the noise faded to elegant silence. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over tables draped in white linen. A pianist played something classical in the corner. "Breathe," Julian whispered as they were led to a private table by the window. "I am breathing," Natasha whispered back. "You're holding your breath." She exhaled, realizing he was right. The maitre d' pulled out her chair and she sat with as much grace as she could manage. Julian ordered wine she couldn't pronounce and appetizers she'd never heard of. When they were alone, he leaned forward. "Thank you for this. I know it's strange. Strange doesn't begin to cover it." Natasha glanced around the room, noting the curious stares. "So what's the story? If anyone asks, how did we meet? Tell them the truth. I walked into your coffee shop and you made the best espresso I'd ever tasted." "That's actually true. I do make excellent espresso." For the first time since entering, "Brew Haven." Julian smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "See? We're already building on honesty." The evening unfolded like a dream she couldn't quite believe. They talked easily once the initial awkwardness faded. Julian told her about growing up in London, moving to Seattle for university, starting his company in a shared apartment with 2 roommates who thought he was crazy. Natasha shared stories about learning to bake from her grandmother, working 3 jobs to pay for culinary school, the food truck she'd run for 2 years before it broke down beyond repair. "Why coffee instead of baking?" Julian asked, genuinely curious. "Bills don't care about dreams." She took a sip of wine. "The coffee shop was stable income. I told myself it was temporary, but temporary became 5 years. And now a billionaire is helping me buy the building, apparently." He laughed, the sound rich and warm. "I keep my promises, Natasha." Something in the way he said her name made her pulse quicken. This was supposed to be business, a simple transaction, but sitting across from Julian Thornfield, she felt something shifting. When reality intrudes, dessert arrived, an architectural masterpiece of chocolate and gold leaf. Natasha was photographing it with her phone when Julian's expression changed, his gaze fixed on something over her shoulder. "Julian, darling." The woman who appeared at their table looked like she'd stepped from a fashion magazine. Blonde hair in perfect waves. Designer. Dress that probably cost more than Natasha's car and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Victoria," Julian stood, his body language instantly defensive. "I heard you'd moved on quickly." Victoria's eyes swept over Natasha with thinly veiled disdain. "How refreshing to see you slumming it." Natasha stood as well, meeting the woman's gaze directly. "And you must be the one who canceled. His loss became my gain." Victoria's smile froze. Julian's hand found Natasha's, his fingers intertwining with hers in what felt like more than pretense. "Natasha and I were just leaving," he said smoothly. "Enjoy your evening, Victoria." They walked out together, his hand still holding hers. The photographers had multiplied outside, but Natasha barely noticed. Her heart pounded from the confrontation, from the feel of Julian's palm against hers, from the realization that somewhere between the coffee shop and the chocolate dessert, this had stopped feeling like an act. In the car, Julian finally released her hand. "I'm sorry about that. Victoria is my ex-fiancée. The breakup was recent and messy." "Is that what tonight was about? Making her jealous?" "No." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Tonight was about proving to my investors that I'm stable and focused. They think the breakup means I'm distracted. In my world, perception is everything." Natasha nodded slowly. "And what about reality?" "Reality," Julian said quietly, "is that I haven't felt this present in months. You did that." The car stopped in front of her apartment building. Rain still fell, softer now, creating halos around. The streetlights, Thank you again, Julian said. My lawyer will contact you Monday about the building. Natasha should have said goodbye and walked away. Instead, she heard herself asking, what if we did this again? Not for show, just to see. Julian looked at her with something like wonder. I'd like that very much. She smiled, opened the door, and stepped into the rain. As she walked to her building, she glanced back once. Julian watched from the car window, and in his eyes, she saw the same confusion and possibility that churned in her own heart. Tomorrow, their faces would be on every gossip site. But tonight, standing in the rain with her hair getting wet and her practical dress clinging to her legs, Natasha Morgan felt like maybe, just maybe, taking a chance on a soaked billionaire in her coffee shop had been the least reasonable and best decision she'd ever made. Monday morning arrived with the force of a freight train. Natasha's phone buzzed incessantly from the moment she woke up. Text messages from friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Emails from reporters offering money for interviews. Social media. Notifications that seemed to multiply by the second. The photos were everywhere. Her and Julian leaving Celestia, his hand on her back. The two of them laughing over wine. That moment when their fingers intertwined in front of Victoria. In every image, they looked like a couple who had known each other for years, not hours. She silenced her phone and headed to Brew Haven, hoping work would provide normalcy. Instead, she found a line of customers that stretched down the block. Most of them held their phones up, trying to be discreet about taking photos. Her assistant manager, Riley, greeted her with wide eyes. "Boss, you're famous. Do you know how many people have ordered coffee this morning just to see if you're really here?" Natasha tied on her apron with shaking hands. Just treat it like any other day. But it wasn't any other day. By noon, 3 different news vans had parked outside. A woman from Seattle Social Magazine offered her $5,000 for an exclusive interview. Her landlord called to say developers were now offering double for the building. She was hiding in the storage room, counting inventory to calm her nerves when Riley knocked. "There's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." Julian stood at the counter, wearing jeans and a simple gray sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. He held 2 coffee cups and a folder tucked under his arm. "I brought reinforcements," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Though I suspect yours is better than anything I could buy." Natasha accepted it, noting the customers who had stopped mid-conversation to stare. "We should talk somewhere private." They retreated to her. Tiny office, barely large enough for a desk and 2 chairs. Julian closed the door, muffling the noise from the shop. "I'm sorry," he began. "I knew there would be attention, but not like this." "Your lawyer called. He said the building purchase is complicated because of all the media scrutiny. Apparently, people think you're trying to buy my silence or affection." Julian set down his coffee. "That's why I'm here. I have a proposal, and before you say no, please hear me out." Natasha sat on the edge of her desk. "I'm listening. The investors' meeting is in 3 weeks. If I can maintain the image of stability until then, the deal goes through. After that, the media will lose interest, and we can go our separate ways." He paused. "But I need your help to make it convincing. You want to keep pretending. I want to make it worth your time." He opened the folder, revealing documents. "The building purchase will go through regardless. But if you agree to this arrangement, I'll also pay off your student loans and provide capital to renovate Brew Haven, however." "You want?" "Enough to turn it into the bakery you've been dreaming about." Natasha's breath caught. She picked up the papers, scanning numbers that seemed impossible. This wasn't just help. This was her entire future, handed to her on a silver platter. "Why?" she asked. "You could hire an actress. Someone trained for this." "Because you're real," Julian said simply. "Saturday night when Victoria showed up, you didn't back down. You stood beside me like we were actually together. That's not something you can fake, and people can tell the difference." She studied his face, searching for manipulation, but found only honesty. 3 weeks. That's all. 3 weeks, he confirmed. After that, we can part as friends, and you'll have everything you need to build your dream. Natasha knew she should. Think about it, consult with someone, make a rational decision. But standing in her cramped office with Julian Thornfield offering her the world, rationality seemed overrated. Okay, she said, but we do this my way. No lies we can't keep track of. No pretending to be someone I'm not. Julian extended his hand. Deal. When their palms touched, electricity sparked between them. Natasha told herself it was just nerves, just the strangeness of the situation. But deep down, she knew better. Learning to play the part, the next 2 weeks became a whirlwind of carefully orchestrated appearances. Julian's publicist, a sharp woman named Caroline Chen, scheduled everything with military precision. Lunch at a waterfront cafe where they were photographed feeding each other bites of salmon. A charity art auction where Julian bid $30,000 on a sculpture Natasha had admired. Weekend brunch at the farmer's market, looking like any normal couple buying fresh vegetables and homemade jam, but it was the private moments that surprised Natasha most. Julian started coming to Brew Haven every morning before the shop opened. He'd sit at the corner table with his laptop while she prepped for the day, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. She learned he was afraid of flying but hid it well, that his mother had died when he was 12 and he'd built his company, partly to prove he could succeed without the family money he'd refused, that he played piano when he couldn't sleep, filling his penthouse with melancholy nocturnes at 3 in the morning. In return, she shared pieces of herself she rarely showed anyone. The grief of losing her grandmother, who had been more parent than her actual parents. The fear that she'd never be brave enough to chase her real dreams. The loneliness of watching friends get married and have children while she poured everything into a business that barely broke even. "You're brave," Julian said one morning, watching her pipe frosting onto cinnamon rolls. "Braver than me." "How? Do you figure that?" "I built a company, but I did it with safety nets. Investors, advisors, people to catch me if I fell." He sipped his coffee. "You're doing this alone, without a backup plan. That takes real courage." Natasha paused, meeting his eyes across the counter. "Maybe we're both just stubborn." "Maybe," he smiled. "But I think it's more than that. The gala that would host the investor meeting loomed like a storm on the horizon. Caroline insisted Natasha needed a complete makeover for the event. Designer dress, professional hair and makeup, lessons on navigating high society conversations. Natasha refused everything except the dress. "I'm not going to pretend to be someone else," she told Caroline firmly. "Julian asked me to do this because I'm real. If I show up looking like every other woman in that room, what's the point?" Caroline looked ready to argue, but Julian cut in. "She's right. Natasha goes as herself or this doesn't work." The morning of the gala, Natasha woke early to bake. It was her ritual before big events, something to ground her when anxiety threatened to take over. She was pulling a tray of croissants from the oven when her phone rang. Julian's name flashed on the screen. "Good morning," she answered, tucking the phone against her shoulder. "Are you baking?" His voice carried a smile. "I can hear the timer." "How? Did you know?" "Because I'm learning your patterns. You bake when you're nervous." Natasha sat down, croissant still warm in her hand. "I keep thinking about tonight. What if I say the wrong thing? What if your investors see through this?" "Natasha." Julian's tone gentled. "They won't see through anything because there's nothing to see through anymore." Her heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" Silence stretched between them, heavy with words neither seemed ready to say. "I mean," Julian finally continued, "that somewhere along the way, this stopped being an arrangement for me. I look forward to seeing you every morning. I think about you when I should be focused on work. Last night I played piano for 3 hours because I couldn't stop replaying our conversation about your grandmother's recipe book. Natasha set down the croissant, her appetite vanishing. Julian, we agreed this was temporary. I know what we agreed. I'm just telling you how I feel. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know before tonight, so there are no secrets between us. After they hung up, Natasha sat in her kitchen for a long time, watching steam rise from the croissants. She had been so careful to keep her own feelings locked away, to maintain the boundaries of their arrangement, but Julian had just demolished those walls with a few honest sentences. The truth was, she felt it too, the way her pulse quickened when he walked into Brew Haven. The disappointment on mornings when he couldn't make it, the way his laugh had become her favorite sound. She had fallen for Julian Thornfield, and pretending otherwise was the biggest lie of all. The evening that changed everything. The Cascade Grand Hotel ballroom glittered like a jewelry box. Chandeliers dripped crystal light over tables adorned with white roses and gold accents. Men in tuxedos and women in designer gowns moved through the space like elegant chess pieces. Natasha arrived in a dress she'd chosen herself, emerald green, silk that flowed rather than clung, with her grandmother's pearl necklace as her only jewelry. Her hair hung in loose waves, and her makeup was subtle enough that she still recognized herself in the mirror. Julian waited at the entrance, and when he saw her, everything else in the room seemed to fade. He wore a classic black tuxedo, but it was the expression on his face that made her breath catch. He looked at her like she was the only person who mattered in a room full of hundreds. "You're stunning," he said, offering his arm. "You're not bad yourself," she replied, trying to lighten the moment even as her heart hammered against her ribs. They moved through the crowd together, Julian introducing her to investors, business partners, and colleagues. Natasha quickly realized that Caroline had been wrong about needing etiquette lessons. These people weren't interested in perfect manners. They were interested in authenticity, and that was something she could provide in abundance. "So, you're the woman who's tamed Julian Thornfield," a silver-haired investor named Preston remarked with a knowing smile. "I've known him 10 years, and I've never seen him this relaxed." "I haven't tamed anyone," Natasha replied. "I just make really good coffee." Preston laughed, a genuine sound that carried warmth. "I like her, Julian. Don't let this one get away." The evening progressed. Natasha began to understand the pressure Julian faced. Every conversation carried weight, every interaction a potential deal or disaster. He navigated it all with practiced ease, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control in every word. During dinner, his hand found hers under the table. The touch was brief, almost unconscious, but it steadied them both. "You're doing great," she whispered. "So are you." After the meal, Julian excused himself to take a phone call. Natasha remained at the table, sipping champagne and watching the other guests. That's when Victoria Ashford appeared, sliding into Julian's empty chair with the grace of a predator. "Enjoying the evening?" Victoria asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Very much." "You know this won't last, right?" Victoria's voice dropped lower. "Julian gets bored easily. I should know. I held his attention for 2 years, and even I wasn't." "Enough." Natasha set down her champagne, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. "Maybe you were looking at it wrong. Maybe it wasn't about being enough. Maybe it was about being right. And you think you're right for him?" Victoria laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You're a phase, darling, a rebellion against his real life. Once the novelty wears off, you'll be just another name he can't quite remember." Before Natasha could respond, Julian returned. He took one look at Victoria, and his expression hardened. "This is a private event, Victoria. You weren't invited. I'm here with Preston. He's an old family friend." Victoria stood, smoothing her dress. "I was just getting To know your latest project. Julian's jaw clenched. Natasha isn't a project, and you need to leave. Gladly. Victoria walked away, but not before throwing one last look over her shoulder. Good luck, Natasha. You'll need it. Julian sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. I'm sorry. I didn't know she'd be here. It's fine. Natasha touched his arm. She doesn't bother me. She should have never spoken to you that way. Julian, look at me. Natasha waited until his eyes met hers. I'm not fragile, and I'm not afraid of your past. The only thing I'm afraid of is what happens in 3 weeks when this arrangement ends. The words hung between them, honest and raw. Julian's hand covered hers on the table, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. What if it doesn't have to end? He asked quietly. What if we stopped calling it an arrangement and started calling it what it really is? Natasha's heart felt too large for her chest. And what is it really? The beginning of something I don't want to lose. Around them, the gala continued in a blur of music and conversation. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, sitting at a table surrounded by white roses and honest confessions, finally admitting what they had both known for weeks. This had never been fake. From that first rain-soaked evening in Brew Haven, something real had been building between them. And now, with 3 weeks of pretending behind them and an uncertain future ahead, they were both ready to stop running from the truth. Julian stood and extended his hand. Dance with me. Natasha took it, letting him lead her to the floor where other couples swayed to a string quartet's rendition of an old love song. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her close, and she rested her head against his shoulder. Don't know how to do this, she whispered. The real relationship part? I've been surviving alone for so long, I forgot what it feels like to let someone in. Then we'll figure it out together, Julian replied, his breath warm against her hair. No more arrangements, no more contracts. Just us, taking it one day at a time. Natasha lifted her head to look at him, and in his eyes, she saw her own hope, reflected back. Just us, she agreed. He leaned down, and their lips met in a kiss that erased every doubt, every fear, every carefully constructed wall she'd built around her heart. When they pulled apart, the applause that filled the ballroom wasn't just for the end of the song. It was for them, for the love story everyone had watched unfold, thinking it was performance when it had been real all along. The morning after the gala, Natasha woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory flooded back. Julian's penthouse, the way he had held her on the dance floor, the kiss that had made her forget every reasonable thought. The decision to stay when he'd asked, not for appearances, but because neither of them wanted the night to end. She found him in the kitchen, barefoot in jeans and a t-shirt, attempting to operate an espresso machine that probably cost more than her monthly rent. You're going to break it, she said, patting across the cool marble floor. Julian turned, his face lighting up. I was trying to surprise you with coffee. Clearly I failed. Let me. Natasha gently nudged him aside, her fingers moving expertly over the machine. Within minutes, the rich aroma of espresso filled the kitchen. She handed him a cup, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Perfect, he said after the first sip. How do you do that? Years of practice. Also, respect for the beans. She leaned against the counter, cradling her own cup. So, what happens? Now? We've officially gone off script. Julian set down his coffee and took her free hand. Now we live our lives without worrying about cameras or investors or what anyone thinks. He paused, his expression growing serious. But there's something I need to tell you first, something I should have mentioned before last night. Natasha's stomach tightened. Okay. The building. Brew Haven. I bought it 2 weeks ago. She blinked, processing. But your lawyer said it was complicated because of the media attention. That was true initially, but I pushed it through anyway because I wanted you to have it, regardless of what happened between us. Julian's thumb traced patterns on her palm. I need you to know that your dream isn't conditional on our relationship. The building is yours. The renovation money is yours. Whether we work out or not, that doesn't change. Tears pricked Natasha's eyes. You did that for me? I did it because you deserve it, because your dream matters, and I have the power to help make it real. He cupped her face gently. I don't want you to ever wonder if you're with me because of what I can give you. This way, you already have everything. Your choices from here are completely free. Natasha set down her coffee and wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. Thank you, she whispered against his chest, for seeing me, for believing in me. They stayed like that for a long moment, the city waking up beyond the windows, until Julian's phone shattered the peace. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted. It's my father. Natasha had heard Julian mention his father exactly once in passing, with a tone that suggested old wounds. Do you need to take it? I probably should. Julian answered, putting it on speaker. Hello, Father. Julian. The voice that emerged was cold, clipped, British accent more pronounced than Julian's. I've been reading about your latest media circus. Dating service industry workers now? How delightfully common. Natasha felt Julian's body tense. She squeezed his hand. Her name is Natasha, and she's not common. She's extraordinary. I'm sure she is. That's not why I'm calling. Papers rustled in the background. I'm calling to inform you that the board of Thornfield Industries has concerns. Your behavior is affecting the family reputation. I left Thornfield Industries 6 years ago to start my own company. The family reputation isn't my concern anymore. Everything you do reflects on this family, whether you like it or not. His father's voice sharpened. I've arranged a meeting for next week. You'll come to London, end this ridiculous relationship, and we'll discuss your return to the family business where you belong. I'm not coming to London, and I'm not ending anything. Julian's voice remained steady, but Natasha could feel the tremor in his hand. I built Thornfield Innovations without your help or your money. I don't need your approval now. You're making a mistake, son. That woman is using you. Goodbye, Father. Julian ended the call and stood motionless for several seconds. Then he turned to Natasha, his eyes searching hers. I'm sorry you had to hear that. Don't apologize for him. Natasha moved closer. But I need to know something. Is he right? Will being with me damage your business? Your reputation? I don't care. Julian, be honest. Your investors, your board, do they have concerns? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Some do. They think you're a distraction, that I've lost focus. He met her gaze. But the numbers don't lie. Since we started seeing each other, I've been more productive than I've been in years, happier, more creative. You're not a distraction. You're the reason I remember why I started this company in the first place. The family estate. 3 days later, despite Julian's protestations, they were on a plane to London. Not because his father had demanded it, but because Natasha had insisted. You can't heal what you won't face, she'd told him. And your father is clearly a wound that hasn't healed. Now, as their car wound through the English countryside toward the Thornfield family estate, Julian's tension was palpable. His hand gripped hers like an anchor. Last chance to turn around, he said. Not happening. The estate appeared through morning mist, like something from a Gothic novel. Stone walls covered in ivy, tall windows reflecting gray skies, gardens that stretched toward distant woods. It was beautiful and cold, much like the man who owned it. Julian's father, Richard Thornfield, waited in the library. He was an older version of Julian, same sharp features and blue eyes, but where Julian's gaze held warmth, Richard's held calculation. So you actually came, Richard said, not bothering to stand. And you brought her. Her name is Natasha Morgan. Julian's voice carried an edge Natasha had never heard before. And yes, I brought her because she's important to me. Richard's gaze swept over Natasha with unconcealed disdain. Miss Morgan, I trust my son is paying you well for this performance. Actually, I'm here for free, Natasha replied calmly. Shocking, I know. Some of us do things because we care about people, not because we're compensated for it. Something flickered in Richard's expression. Surprise, maybe, or grudging respect. Spirited, I'll give you that. Father, why did you really ask me here? Julian cut through the tension. This isn't about Natasha or my reputation. What do you want? Richard stood, moving to the window overlooking the gardens. Thornfield Industries is failing. The board wants you back. They've always wanted you back. You were supposed to take over to continue the legacy. That was never my dream. It was yours. Dreams don't build empires, Julian. Duty does. Responsibility does. And love? Natasha interjected. Both men turned to her. Where does love fit into your empire? Love is a luxury, Richard said dismissively. One that costs more than it's worth. Is that why you pushed Julian's mother away? The words came out before Natasha could stop them. She knew she'd crossed a line, but she didn't care. Julian told me she died when he was 12. He also told me you were never there, even before she got sick. Too busy building your empire. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face had gone pale, his composure finally cracking. You know nothing about my marriage, he said quietly, dangerously. I know that your son built something extraordinary without you, and instead of being proud, you're trying to tear him down. Natasha stood her ground. I know he's twice the man you'll ever be because he learned what not to do by watching you. Julian touched her arm. Natasha, it's okay. No, it's not okay. She turned to Richard. You called me common. Maybe I am. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with a single mother who worked 3 jobs. I've never attended your fancy schools or traveled in private jets. But I know what it means to fight for what matters. And I know that the man standing beside me matters more than any business deal or family legacy. Richard stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was a harsh sound, but genuine. You're right, he said finally. About all of it. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking older. I destroyed my marriage chasing success. I lost my wife because I was too proud to admit I needed help when the company started failing, and I pushed away my son because he reminded me of everything I'd sacrificed. Julian seemed frozen, as if seeing his father clearly for the first time. I'm not asking you to come back to save me, Richard continued. I'm asking because I'm a foolish old man who doesn't know how else to connect with his son. Business is all I know. Then learn something new, Julian said quietly. He moved to his father's chair, crouching down to eye level. I'll help you. Save Thornfield Industries, but not by joining it. I'll consult, advise, use my connections. But I'm building my own life now, on my own terms, with people who matter. Richard's eyes glistened. Like her? Julian glanced back at Natasha. Especially like her. The hospital. They stayed in London for a week, helping Richard restructure his failing company. Natasha watched Julian work, marveling at his ability to see solutions others missed. He was brilliant, but more than that, he was compassionate. He found ways to save jobs, to protect people who depended on the company for their livelihoods. On their last evening, Richard invited them to dinner at his private club. It was awkward at first. Decades of distance not easily bridged, but by dessert, Richard was actually smiling. You've done well for yourself, son, he said. Better than I ever did. That's not true. You built something that employed thousands. But I built it alone, and it nearly destroyed me. Richard looked at Natasha. Don't make my mistakes. Hold on to her. I intend to, Julian replied. They were walking back to their hotel when Julian's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his face went white. We have to go back to Seattle, now. What happened? It's Riley. She's in the hospital. There was a fire at Brew Haven. The flight back felt endless. Natasha's mind raced with terrible possibilities. Riley was more than an employee. She was a friend, almost family. And Brew Haven, her dream finally realized, might be gone. They landed at dawn and went straight to the hospital. Riley lay in a bed, her arm bandaged, her face smudged with soot but otherwise unharmed. "Boss," she croaked when Natasha rushed in. "I'm so sorry, I tried to stop it." "Stop what?" "What happened?" "Someone broke in after closing, deliberately started the fire. I saw them running away." Riley's eyes filled with tears. "The kitchen is destroyed. The espresso machine, your grandmother's recipe book, everything." Natasha felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Julian's arm, wrapped around her waist, holding her steady. "Do they know who did it?" Julian asked. Riley nodded weakly. Security cameras caught her face. It was Victoria Ashford. The name hit like a physical blow. Victoria had done this out of spite, out of jealousy, destroying Natasha's livelihood to hurt Julian. "I'm pressing charges," Julian said immediately. "She'll pay for this." But Natasha barely heard him. She excused herself and walked to the hospital. Chapel, a small, quiet room with wooden pews and soft light. She sat in the back row and finally let herself cry. For Brew Haven, for her grandmother's lost recipes, for the dream that had been snatched away just as it was coming true. Julian found her there 20 minutes later. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her and held her hand. "I rebuilt it. Once," Natasha finally said. "I can rebuild it again." "We'll rebuild it together," Julian corrected. "Better than before." She leaned against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Why would she do this? What did I ever do to her?" "This isn't about you. It's about me, about her inability to let go." Julian's voice hardened. "But she's crossed a line. Hurting you to get to me is unforgivable." Over the next few days, the story exploded across every news outlet. Victoria, Ashford arrested for arson. The beloved coffee shop destroyed by a billionaire's vengeful ex. Public opinion turned sharply against Victoria, while sympathy poured out for Natasha. But Natasha didn't care about public opinion. She cared about the people who depended on Brew Haven for jobs. She cared about the regular customers who had nowhere else to go for their morning coffee. She cared about the dream that felt further away than ever. Julian threw himself into helping. Within a week, he'd secured a temporary location for Brew Haven to operate while the original building was renovated. He hired the best contractors, the best designers. He consulted Natasha on every decision, making sure it remained her vision, her space. The proposal 6 months later, Natasha stood in front of the newly renovated Brew Haven. It was better than she'd imagined. The fire damage had been completely erased. In its place was a beautiful blend of coffee shop and bakery, with her grandmother's recipes displayed in frames on the walls. The espresso machine gleamed. Fresh pastries filled the display cases. Everything she'd dreamed of, finally real. The grand reopening drew a crowd. Customers old and new lined up down the block. Riley managed the counter with practiced ease, her arm fully healed. Julian stood off to the side, watching with pride as Natasha greeted guests and poured coffee. As evening fell and the last customers trickled out, Natasha found Julian waiting at their favorite table by the window. "Tired?" he asked. "Exhausted, happy." She sat across from him. "Thank you for today, for all of this. You did this. I just helped clear the obstacles. You did more than that." Natasha reached across the table for his hand. "You believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. You fought for me when I didn't know how to fight anymore. You showed me what it means to be truly seen." Julian's expression softened. "You did the same for me. Before you, I was just going through motions, building success without purpose. You reminded me why any of it matters." He stood suddenly and walked around the table. Then, to Natasha's shock, he knelt on one knee. "I know we said we'd take things one day at a time," Julian began, pulling a small box from his pocket. "But I don't want to wait anymore. These past months, watching you rebuild, seeing your strength and grace falling more. In love with you every single day, I've realized something." Natasha's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "I don't want just days with you, Natasha Morgan. I want a lifetime. I want to wake up every morning to your coffee. I want to hold your hand through every challenge and celebrate every victory. I want to build a life where we're both free to chase our dreams because we're stronger together than apart." He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the light. Simple, elegant, with a single diamond that reminded Natasha of starlight. "Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." Julian slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that felt like coming home. Outside, a few customers who had lingered started applauding. Someone must have called the press because camera flashes began appearing in the windows. But Natasha didn't care. Let them photograph this moment. Let the world see what real love looked like. This wasn't an arrangement or a performance. This was truth, messy and beautiful and absolutely real. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too," Julian replied. "From that first rainy night when you saved me from the cameras, you've been saving me in ways I didn't know I needed." They stood together in the coffee shop that had brought them together, surrounded by the smell of fresh pastries and brewing coffee, holding each other as the city lights flickered on outside. Two people from completely different worlds who had found their way to each other through honesty, courage, and the willingness to take a chance on something real. Victoria had been sentenced to community service and probation. Richard Thornfield had called to offer congratulations, his voice warmer than Julian had ever heard it. Riley was already planning the wedding, clipboard in hand and ideas flowing. But in that moment, none of it mattered except the man and woman holding each other in a coffee shop, proving that sometimes the best love stories start with a desperate whisper and a willingness to pretend, until pretending becomes the truest thing you've ever known. Epilogue. 1 year later, the wedding took place in a garden overlooking Puget Sound, small and intimate, with only the people who truly mattered. Natasha wore a simple white dress and her grandmother's pearls. Julian cried when she walked down the aisle. Not caring who saw, Richard Thornfield attended, walking Natasha down the aisle since her own father had passed years before. It was a gesture that spoke of healing, of second chances, of family chosen rather than inherited. During their first dance, Natasha whispered, "Do you remember what you said that first night? That I was saving you from a headline you couldn't afford?" Julian smiled, holding her close. "I remember. You were wrong. You didn't need saving from a headline. You needed saving from a life that had forgotten how to feel. And you," he replied, spinning her gently, "needed someone to show you that your dreams were worth fighting for. We saved each other," Natasha concluded. "We did," Julian agreed. "Best fake date I ever had." They laughed, the sound carrying across the garden where their friends and family celebrated. Above them, stars emerged in the darkening sky. Below them, the city they both loved spread out in glittering lights. And somewhere in that city, Brew Haven stood with its doors open, welcoming anyone who needed good coffee, fresh pastries, or a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with a simple whisper and the courage to say yes. Their story, which had started with pretense and performance, had become the most honest thing either of them had ever known. A reminder that love doesn't always announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes it arrives rain-soaked and desperate, asking for help. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to take the chance, it becomes the greatest truth you'll ever tell. The end.